listening to Mornings on the Mall with Brian and Larry. And joining us right now is U.S. Army 4-star General and a man who knows a little bit about troop sizes and what's needed to get the job done. That sort of comes as a job description with the 4-star General. It's Jack Keane. Thanks for joining us, General Keane.
Yeah, glad to be here this morning.
Well, listen, you were there for the first year of the Iraq War, and then you served as an advisor on troop levels. In fact, your paper suggesting the surge was a big part of President Bush's decision to increase troop levels. So I'd love for your take on President Obama's decision to keep some troops in Afghanistan, and this suggestion that now for multiple times he is ignoring his military commanders. You still have friends in the military. Is that the case?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Well, first of all, the first question, it's a good thing that the president's keeping some troops, and it's also a good thing that he's keeping the multiple bases that are there, because given the geography of Afghanistan, we cannot conduct counterterrorism operations in the east against the Haqqani network and in the south against the Quetta Shore or the Taliban, which actually originated the whole insurgency, without multiple bases. So those two are good decisions. The problem with it is that the troop level at 9,800 isn't sufficient. I think all of his national security team understands that, and certainly going down to 5,500 from where we are, I think is a wrong decision. I know his field commanders wanted to keep the troop level at the level it is at, and this, as you indicated in the second question, in my judgment, is the sixth time that President Obama has refused to accept the troop level that's been recommended by his commanders, which is really something that's unprecedented.
Well, let me ask you about that, because what is the end result when a president decides, I'm not going to give you the troops that you need? I assume that when military commanders come and say, we need these many troops to accomplish the mission that we have here, that they have a reason for that, and when they don't get those troops, that something then is not going to be covered, something is going to be lacking. What happens?
Well, I think the most obvious one was in Iraq when General Lloyd Austin, who's now the Central Command commander, had recommended a force level of over 20,000 to stay in Iraq, and we wound up with none. The Al-Qaeda reemerged initially as the Al-Qaeda, and then given the social and political upheaval taking place in Syria, they were able to establish a sanctuary there and actually build an army. So that's number one. Number two, when Petraeus and McChrystal, both accomplished general officers, both highly respected, recommended to the president that the minimum force level that was required for the Afghan surge that President Obama was inclined to do was 40,000. Others were recommended to him 20,000, that effort being led by the vice president. He compromised at 30, and, one of the generals mentioned, I don't know who, we're not arguing over a transportation bill here. This is a campaign that we're trying to do, and we just laid out the minimum forces required. Here's the impact. Because we only had 30 versus 40, we could not put the surge forces in the east and in the south simultaneously to put maximum pressure on the Taliban. We had to put them in the south only, and then our intent was to sequentially move them to the east. The president pulled those forces out prematurely in a year and a half. We never were able to put the surge forces into the east, and the security situation that we have in the east still remains unstable because we were not able to apply those forces. So those two examples.
Can I ask you, General Keane, there's another part of your job as a military leader that's very important, and that is the attitude and morale of your troops. And it's one thing for a commander-in-chief to constantly be going and speaking to the troops and getting them roused up and saying, you're going to go out there and you're going to bring the Taliban to their knees and we're going to destroy the enemy and we're going to win this. This commander-in-chief, during this entire long, protracted campaign where he has been commander-in-chief, he goes out and he tells them, we're bringing you home. We're going to end this and you're going to come home. And then when the time comes, he pulls the rug out and says, oh, forget it. You're going to stay a little while longer. The end result is they still stay in country, but it's an attitude difference, isn't it?
Well, very much so. Secretary Gates mentioned in his most recent interview that received some publicity, and I reviewed his book for the Wall Street Journal, so I'm pretty familiar with his commentary in the book. And he said that one of his criticisms of the president, for the 2.5 years he worked for him, was that he never spoke positively about the war. He never provided our troops who were fighting the war the kind of moral foundation that you need. And certainly he never talked about winning. There was always talked about ending. But he never actually talked to the American people in any repetitive way about it. And here's why this is important. Our soldiers are out there doing something, obviously, that they volunteered to do. And they believe they have the adaptability and the skill sets to do something that, frankly, a lot of people cannot do. And we applaud them for that. But believe me, it's not just about out there risking your own life. And it's also the fact that you're doing something that's very human in the human experience. And by that I mean, as a soldier, you're asked to take lives. And you're asked to take lives sometimes on a significant basis for any human being. And it's very important, I think, for the commander-in-chief to provide a moral foundation and a sense of honor in terms of why we're asking you to do such a thing. Why this sacrifice for yourself as a human being is worth this effort. And I think that's always something that a president has actually a moral obligation to do. And I've been disappointed that this president really hasn't done that. And Secretary Gates was saying much the same thing in his own words.
In about the 2 minutes left we have, General Keane, I'd like you to address the situation in Syria. Russian President Putin has put some of his best forces there. They seem to be going after not only ISIS, but also against some of the people that we have been supporting out there. Your thoughts about whether or not we should be more deeply involved in Syria?
Well, first of all, the Russians have, you're right, they do have some of their best forces there. They have an inferior force compared to ours, but they have some very good units and some very good equipment. And they are assisting a ground offensive that's taken place. They're struggling with that ground offensive, to be quite frank about it. The Syrian army significantly assisted by the Iranians, and one of the reasons for that is the Syrian army is just a mere shadow of its former self. It's 100,000 plus versus 200,000, low morale, equipment problems, desertion rates, etc. So it's hard to prop up a force like that, as we've seen with the Iraqi forces in Iraq facing ISIS. I think there are some prudent things you do. I'm not advocating ground troops into Syria, but establishing safe haven for the refugees makes a lot of sense to me. To get huge international backing, you'd have to have some moderate opposition forces in those safe havens to protect them from others who would encroach on the ground, and you'd obviously have to be able to enforce it from the air. I believe if we had done that a couple of years ago, as many people were recommending to include those in the president's administration, the Russians wouldn't be at any air base today, that's for sure.
Retired four-star General Jack Keane, thank you so much for lending your perspective to these important issues. It's always good to have you, sir.
Good talking to you.
Thanks a lot.